Hi there, everybody. Renegade Historian coming to you with a glass of some nice Haitian rum in hand to talk to you about one of the most notorious pirates in history. And along with the samurai and the outlaws of the Wild West, pirates are one of those historical archetypes that we just never seem to get tired of. They're simply too cool to let them fall into historical obscurity. They were men and women of various ethnicities who rejected the conventions of their day to live on their own terms and by their own wits and skill and nothing more. They were freer than most of us could ever imagine being, in a way. They flipped the bird to the powers that be and did whatever the fuck they wanted. And now when I say pirates, I'm referring specifically to the figures of the golden age of piracy. There have been pirates for as long as we've had ships, but the immortal names of Captain Kidd, Calico Jack Rackham, Black Bart Roberts, Anne Bonny, Mary Read, and Black Caesar all came from the golden age of piracy, from roughly 1650 to 1730. However, none of their names have the same sort of infamy attached to them as one Edward Thatch, better known by his nickname Blackbeard. This contemporary of the many pirates I just mentioned has become synonymous with the era. If Wild Bill Hickok is the face of the Wild West, then Blackbeard is the face of West Indies piracy, and he was an absolute mad lad, but not in the way you think. We don't know too much about Blackbeard's early life. We think he was born in Bristol, England, and probably came from a relatively wealthy family as he could read and write, which is a rarity for anyone in the time period, but especially for a pirate. And like most of the pirates of his era, he was more than likely a sailor who served in the War of Spanish Succession. When that war came to an end in 1714, most of the combatant nations scaled down their navies, which left a whole lot of men with the skill set for naval warfare unemployed. Well, what's an unemployed Navy veteran to do in the early 18th century? There were so many sailors around that finding work with their skill set wasn't easy. So why not become a pirate? If you manage to stay alive, it could be pretty lucrative. Funny enough, it's entirely possible you'd find enemy combatants from the War of Spanish Succession serving on the same pirate vessel. You'd also find escaped slaves. It didn't much matter to your average pirate captain which your color or background were, so long as you were an able sailor and handy with a blade or a gun, but preferably both. Anyway, after the war, Blackbeard settled on New Providence in the Bahamas, which was the base of operations for many infamous pirates, including one Benjamin Hornigold. New Providence was a pirate settlement with a transient population. The harbor could accommodate numerous pirate vessels, but the waters were shallow and impassable to the larger warships of the Spanish, English, and French navies. Blackbeard joined Hornigold's crew in early 1717 and was quickly given command of a sloop. For a year, he and Hornigold were the terrors of the West Indies and the east coast of the United States. For their first voyage, they set out north together and seized 8 merchant ships along America's east coast, and it was during these raids that Blackbeard was first recorded as a pirate in his own right. The two were soon joined by Stede Bonnet and his ship Revenge in the summer. Bonnet and Blackbeard traded ships, with him taking Blackbeard's old sloop and Blackbeard taking the Revenge. The fleet soon captured 2 more ships, Good Intent and Richard, which joined Revenge, Blackbeard's old ship, and Hornigold's Ranger. Blackbeard then set out north again in autumn, and in just 3 weeks in October he took another 15 ships, earning a reputation as a scourge of the high seas. Hornigold, meanwhile, only wanted to attack his enemies from the Old War, the French and the Spanish, but newer members of his fleet wanted to hit British ships too. Hornigold was demoted and retired soon after, taking his Ranger and one of the other sloops and leaving Blackbeard in charge of the other 2. Hornigold accepted a pardon from the king and eventually became a pirate hunter, but Blackbeard and Hornigold would never meet again. Following that October raid, in November 1717, Blackbeard sailed east to the Windward Islands, and his ships attacked a French slave vessel called La Concorde off the coast of St. Vincent. Each of Blackbeard's ships launched a broadside, killing many of the ship's crew and officers. The crew of La Concorde surrendered, and Blackbeard took the ship as his own, and some of the slaves aboard were recruited by the pirate. The left were rest on Bekia. The remaining French crew were given Blackbeard's smaller sloop and sent home. And that's the thing. For as infamous as he was, for as fearsome his reputation, Blackbeard wasn't particularly bloodthirsty. If he could take what he wanted without killing, he'd do it. And there's no record of him ever torturing or killing his victims unnecessarily. He let his fearsome reputation do the work for him. Of any of the pirates operating in the early 18th century, Blackbeard was the one you wanted to run into, if you had to be robbed, that is, because at least you had a good chance of leaving with your life, and perhaps that's why he had such a fearsome reputation. He scared the shit out of loads of people and then let them go, and they spread his growing legend. And of course you know how people embellish. First drink in, you're telling the story of how your ship was robbed by Blackbeard and you narrowly escaped with your life. By the fifth drink, Blackbeard is the devil himself, dressed as a man, raising demons from the high seas and sicking them after your ships. I can imagine that sort of embellishment from sailors with wounded egos, at least. Blackbeard saw potential with La Concorde, though. He equipped her with 40 guns and renamed her the Queen Anne's Revenge. It was his most famous ship and relatively large for a pirate vessel. It was one of the most powerful pirate ships of the era, simply because it was so large and had way more guns than the usual sloops or small frigates your average pirate sailed on. But equipped with the Queen Anne's Revenge, Blackbeard went on a tear through the Lesser Antilles. He captured several ships and even raided the French colony of Guadeloupe in a rather brazen move. Shortly after taking La Concorde as his own ship, Blackbeard attacked a merchant sloop called Margaret. The ship's captain, Henry Bostock, and her crew were Blackbeard's prisoners for hours as the ship was picked clean. Then Bostock and his men were set free unharmed to sail their now admittedly much lighter ship home to St. Christopher Island, where Governor Walter Hamilton had Bostock sign an affidavit. That document has become an important source on both Blackbeard and his ship. Bostock described a tall, spare man with a long black beard, and from that description came the nickname Blackbeard. One of Blackbeard's favorite scare tactics was to put slow fuses under his hat to create a fiery cloud of smoke around his head. Combined with the unwashed, long black beard that Bostock described and a fearsome grimace staring down at you, and you've got one scary motherfucker. And that was what Blackbeard used to do his robberies. He hoped people would surrender based on his scary appearance and reputation, and more often than not, that worked. But having raised hell for the British and the French, Blackbeard decided he was going to go fuck with the Spanish now, and sailed west for the Gulf of Mexico, where he ransacked Spanish shipping lines. The Spaniards gave him another nickname, El Gran Diablo, or the Great Devil, further fueling his fearsome legacy and making his job easier. And even after so many ships had been taken a prize, Blackbeard's men had low morale. They hadn't taken a big score in a while. So in May 1718, Blackbeard declared himself a commodore, and in an even more daring move, he blockaded Charleston, South Carolina, and robbed/took hostages from any ships leaving the port. His pirate fleet had actually grown large enough that it could blockade a town, which was rather impressive, to say the very least. But after that, Blackbeard moved further north into North Carolina and the Outer Banks. Along the way, the Queen Anne's Revenge ran aground and sunk. So Blackbeard took command of his final ship, the Adventure, and it was here that Stede Bonnet left Blackbeard's crew. only to be hung for piracy 4 months later, a fate that befell most of Blackbeard's contemporaries. Blackbeard then marooned some of his men and took his most loyal followers north to Bath, North Carolina, where he secured a royal pardon in a pirate amnesty deal. And, well, you can take the pirate out of the piracy, but you can't take the piracy out of the pirate. Within just a short while, Blackbeard and his men were back to their swashbuckling ways. They set up base on Ocracoke Island, which I've been to and I highly recommend a visit to. It's a lovely little place. There's a small town, they've got gift shops, they've got a rinky-dink little Blackbeard museum that's a lot of fun. Anyway, in August, he raided 2 French ships out in the open sea from his base at Ocracoke and claimed his loot had been taken from a shipwreck. Nobody believed that one. But Blackbeard was now operating too close for the comfort of Alexander Spotswood, the lieutenant governor of Virginia, who decided to do something about this pirate once and for all. He sent a Royal Navy task force under the command of Lieutenant Robert Maynard and his ship, the HMS Pearl, which was accompanied by 2 commandeered ships. On the evening of November 21st, 1718, Maynard found Blackbeard's ships anchored on the inner side of Ocracoke Island. He had caught Blackbeard with his pants down. The man only had about 25 men aboard his ship and maybe 40 overall. Despite putting up one hell of a fight, during which Blackbeard put one of Maynard's ships out of commission, he and his men couldn't overcome the superior numbers of the Royal Navy, and after a melee on the deck of Maynard's ship, Blackbeard was cut down. He was one of the few pirates who got to go out fighting. Most were taken alive and hanged, but nobody was going to take Edward Thatch alive. A later examination of Blackbeard's body showed that he had been shot 5 times and cut 20, but he still had kept fighting. The muddy Blackbeard was then decapitated, and his head was suspended from the bow of Maynard's ship, and his body dumped into the sea. According to pirate lore, his body swam 3 times around Maynard's ship before sinking to the bottom of the ocean. He was still scaring people from beyond the grave, the crazy motherfucker. The rest of Blackbeard's men, a mix of white and black pirates, were brought to Williamsburg for trial. Spotswood didn't want to give the black men a trial, just to kill them outright, but in the end all of them were tried together and hanged together for piracy. And while Maynard and Spotswood are historical footnotes today, Blackbeard is the archetypal pirate. Even though he only operated for 2 years, we're still talking about Edward Thatch more than 300 years after he sunk to Davy Jones' locker. In his brief career, it's estimated that he looted 40 ships, and his use of fear left an impression on people that helped build what can only be described as a goddamn legend. And all I can think at the end of this is, that's gotta be the best pirate I've ever seen. Good night, everybody. Renegade Historian, signing off.